Hi. Sorry, I can't hear the audio.
That's not the first time I've done that.
Okay, all right.
And it's not the first guest who's reminded me, so thank you. As I was saying, thanks Jongwoo for joining me, and thank you everyone else who may be tuning in live at Twitch TV, or possibly watching us on YouTube afterwards. I know we have quite a few people who do that as well. My name is Karina. I'm here from GameDevCafe.com, and if this is your first time tuning in, you are watching Get to Know a Game Dev live. Today featuring, as I mentioned, Jongwoo Kim of Kitfox Games. You may have heard of Kitfox Games and Game Dev Cafe from a few spots before. We've interviewed Tanya. She's a great interview, and I know that Jongwoo, you get to work with her quite closely, so lucky
Right.
you. Also, we did feature the Twitch canvas that you guys were playing with, which has to do with Shrouded Isle, and we'll talk about that obviously in a moment. But thank you so much today for joining us. I know you're the programmer on the Shrouded Isle project. Is that right?
It's a bit more complicated than that. I usually like to say my job title is like a gameplay programmer
Okay.
because I end up doing a lot of tech-related stuff, but it's usually so tied to the design, or at least the moment-to-moment gameplay. With the Shrouded Isle specifically, I also had a primary design role as well. So,
Oh,
a
wow.
bit of both. Yeah, yeah.
No
Uh,
wonder we're talking to you. And I guess is that yeah, I mean, programmer, designer. We'll get into sort of what that role entails for you. But is that sort of your uh, most official title when it comes to your role in the games industry, or is this something that's specific to this project? And normally you're sort of in other roles. What's
I guess
sort of your
it's
official capacity?
I guess it's as close to official as it gets. I mean, keeping in mind that Kitfox is a small studio of six people.
Hmm.
Depending on the project that we're taking and the phase of the project, my emphasis changes. So on a like earlier stage in a project, like I might have I might take more of a design role.
I
But as
see.
a project reaches like a completion, like there's much more tech emphasis over time.
Of course. And with Shrouded Isle in particular, is this the first project that you've worked on at Kitfox Games?
No, I'm actually one of the co-founders of the company. So I
Oh,
work on
fabulous.
yeah. So I work on the on Shadow Planet as well as Moon Hunters.
Wonderful. And we did talk to Tanya about Moon Hunters. It's a great game. Shattered Planet, one that we're saving for something else that we're going to try and do later at the Game
Okay.
Dev Cafe. So we'll put a pin in that for now. But I guess just getting back to you, when I guess if you want to just give me a little bit of a history, just in case people aren't familiar with Kitfox, because I don't think we talked about this with Tanya. But
Okay.
when did the studio begin, and sort of how long ago did sort of this, I guess, team
Okay.
come together and start making games?
I think the studio was founded about 4 years ago.
Oh, okay.
So there's a game development incubator that was around at the time called Execution Minds.
Yes.
And so Kitfox was one of the earlier teams going through it. So my history here is a bit more complicated because initially I was with a different team, and that team disintegrated.
Right.
And then I joined Kitfox because they needed a programmer.
Okay.
And so when we exited the program, when we founded the company, I was part of the team already. So that's why I had programmer stats.
I see. Perfect. Well, I think seeing what Kitfox has put out, Shrouded Isle is certainly in line with the projects that your studio has become known for. But I guess without putting words in your mouth, what do you think is unique or different about this particular project?
So the Shrouded Isle is a unique project in multiple aspects. But like it just starting from the like most obvious, it has a very distinct art style and concept. It is a human sacrifice cult simulator with a very unique blue and yellow two-tone art style, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So just the initial like idea of it is just so beyond like what people normally expect from a commercial project. That yeah, it just it's interesting. Like there's some inherent intrigue to it. Um, from a design standpoint, I think it's interesting because it's a subjective simulation.
Mhm.
So a lot of simulations are very economic in focus. You gain resources and you spend that resources to build this and then so forth. But the Shrouded Isle is about like a, it puts you into the perspective of a cult leader. And you don't care about the material well-being of your townspeople. You care more about like how faithful are they? Like,
Mhm.
are they practicing the religion correctly? And you care about your seasonal sacrifice to your dark god. You care about being able to continue doing that by maintaining the loyalty of the five families and so forth. And so I feel like it's a very unique take on the management genre, and yeah, like it's been an interesting experience of just seeing the project come together as well. A lot of people aren't aware that this was not a primary daytime project. This was done on a part-time basis for most of the team members. So it started off as a game jam that we decided to pursue into a full
Oh,
commercial project. Yeah,
I
it
didn't
was
actually realize that. It doesn't feel like a game jam game.
right. And so like I mean that's like how much it's changed over time, right? Like it's just that we've put in so much energy and love into it.
Mhm.
But the jam was Ludum Dare 33 back in 2015, and the theme of the jam is you are the monster.
Ah, okay. Starts to make
And
sense.
yeah. And so like we could have interpreted that as like an actual like physiological monstrosity, but we wanted to do something different. We wanted to make it about someone who's a like administrative monster, someone who does terrible things on a day-to-day basis because that's what their moral values drive them
Right.
towards.
Just the practical nature of it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting. I guess uh, having now known that it came out of a game jam, was it something that you guys intended to develop into a larger project, or did something cue you to tell you that this might have some potential to be something bigger and better? Because
Right.
it's certainly distinctive, but that's sort of a big risk. I don't want to say risk because it's a pretty great game, but you don't know that until you put it out there.
Yeah, sure. So we did not have the intention when doing the game jam to like find something that we wanted to develop into a full commercial project. In fact, the circumstances of the jam were very particular as well. So most of the members of the jam team are not employees of Kitfox.
Oh, okay.
They're external collaborators. So in fact, Kitfox has a bit of a more of a publishing role in this situation officially, even though I've been working on it and Tanya's working on it. But I mean, as far as um, what can I say? As far as our like what our contract says and so
Right.
forth, that we're like individuals working on this project together.
Okay.
Um, and so yeah, so we did the jam, and you asked about why we decided to pursue it, into like what made us choose to pursue it. And it's in part because it immediately had such exposure. So we got second place in the art category
Oh,
and fourth
nice.
in audio. Yeah,
That's a
and
pretty
I
big
think
jam for, I mean, I'm sure most people are familiar with it, but
yeah,
that's no small feat. Yeah.
right. And then I believe we had an article on various game journalism websites, and so we knew people were interested in it. And the other part of it is because we were so constrained in time during the jam, a lot of the ideas that we really wanted to fully develop, we didn't have the time to do it. So there was so much room for this thing to grow. Whereas in other jam projects, they're somewhat self-contained. I mean, sure, like you could always find ways to extend them. But like certain action game concepts, well, it's already working pretty fine. Like what more
Just
could
by
we possibly?
necessity, it's kind of,
Yeah,
yeah, encapsulated. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So those factors made it the absolute standout among the various jam projects that we were doing.
Oh,
And
cool.
so, yeah,
I mean, it's exciting when you do stumble upon something that you can sort of take some extra care with, and as you say, make bigger and better. With this particular game, was there any particular I don't know, challenges or difficulties that you had in taking it past, sort of the jam phase and into a larger project? Because I imagine beyond the story and artwork, there's probably a lot that goes into expanding a game where, you're managing a lot of different resource elements.
Right. So as far as a system design side of it, if you check out the Jam game, so you can look up The Sacrifice on HIO.
Oh, cool.
The resource management aspect of it is very bare. Like you have a food bar, you have a shelter bar, and so forth. And it worked well enough for a Jam game, and like the concept that sold people anyway. But like we were left in a situation where we really want political intrigue between the families, or like we really want the sacrifice to be meaningful and so forth, and making that happen, and finding mechanics that wouldn't undercut the theme of the game, the overall concept of the game, was difficult, because as I mentioned earlier, like so many of games of the same genre tend to very focus on growth and progress and so forth.
Right.
Whereas this is like basically an apocalyptic setting.
It's sort of the opposite. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's no hope, and you're killing townspeople. And it's like, if I put a tech tree in here, is that going to enhance the experience? I mean, maybe for some people, but I don't want to do that.
Right. I do wonder, I know that there's a lot of different endings to the game, but I do wonder if you guys had planned to have more, or if you plan to have more in the future. Is this a game that could potentially go on expanding forever?
I mean, theoretically, any game could expand forever.
That's fair. That's true.
But I mean, more realistically, I mean, it's a project that like at launch we got a really great reception from players as well as press. So it's definitely something we're looking at right now. I can't promise anything, of course, but I feel like there's still more that we can do with the Shrouded Isle, and we're definitely excited at the possibilities for sure.
Now, I understand that you guys are coming out with a different color palette for the game. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
I've heard that from someone. Is that prompted by user feedback, or just kind of trying something new and different? I like it. It kind of reminds me of the old King's Quest games or something, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I've heard from a few people that they were happy that there were different options. Is that like an accessibility issue?
It was in part accessibility issue. It was also just an experiment to see, okay, so the game works like this, but like what are like some things that are relatively a low effort on our part that would be interesting for players. And the color palette was definitely something. As far as accessibility, we've had feedback from various players that it was difficult to look at the screen for an extended period of time.
Yeah. I think it's the extended period that gets you, because we all spend too much time in front of screens. I mean, it's exciting that you guys are trying different things with the game. Was that at all part of your Twitch Canvas experiments as well? Because I know with the Twitch Canvas you tried some different color palettes. So is that sort of how you're testing things for the game?
It's entirely possible. Like some of the things we were doing with the Twitch Canvas inspired us to add the color options. It wasn't a direct result, I'd say. We're just generally interested in strange systemic experiments, I guess. And because we already had the Shrouded Isle in development at the time, it just made sense to use that as a base. And it's got two colors, and it was something like. It just worked well with the particular Twitch experiment that we wanted to do at the time.
Absolutely, it was very cool. That was my sort of first introduction to the game, so it was a great little experiment, as you say, that also sort of led people think back to discover the actual storyline. Cool. I guess back to yourself personally, is this the type of game that you like to make? I mean, I'm not sure if this game was something that you piloted because you were really passionate about it, or if there's sort of something else that you would consider sort of your forte or main interest when it comes to games.
I guess it definitely reflects on my tastes, right? I guess my attitude is if there are ways to express the concept through systems, I would choose to do that.
I see.
And so in that regard, the Shrouded Isle reflects what I guess I like to make. I mean, that being said, Kitfox hasn't released like other management games prior to this point. I would like to experiment more with more. I mean, so like I'm a huge fan of the Crusader Kings franchise.
Right.
And I don't know if you're also aware of like the Romance of the Three Kingdoms series as well, but like simulations with a lot of characters doing like a lot of intrigue. And I guess like this has some element of that, like some ideas like that were inspired by those games in there.
Again, I can see how if you took it to the next level or to the next sort of, I guess, phase of scope, you could make this game sort of big and complicated and multiplayer and crazy. I would love to see Kitfox kind of go in that direction with this project or with another. That would be really exciting. Is the cult theme something that sort of personally interested you? Because I mean, it's really cool. I think a lot of people just think it's cool to run a cult. Like, that's cool.
Yeah.
Like, haven't we always like wondered that at some point? But besides that, is there anything sort of interest to you around, I guess, the characterization of that sort of story, how it affects people, stuff like that?
I think the members that were involved in the jam, as well as other people at Kitfox, like I think there is we have an interest in like a spiritual elements, I guess. And I think personally, like I like gothic horror, and the artist Erica, and she was also very much into it at the time because Bloodborne just came out, so that was a big influence. And so, like, I'm not sure like a cult specifically was like what we're trying to do with it, but the idea of like this like Lovecraftian horror that exists beneath. How do we capture that in the time that we have? And the thing that made most sense is you being the servant to this dark slumbering god.
Absolutely. Oh, it's cool. And I guess Moonhunters is a little bit like that in a sense where it sort of tries to work in some of the spiritualism, but in its own way. It's interesting, I think, that you guys layer, unique game systems with cool aesthetics with different stories that sort of explore this, I guess, decision making that the player has to do anyways, but the impact that can have on either, I guess, your group and your storyline of Moonhunters, or in this case, a whole village and whether they live or die.
Right.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
You mentioned a couple games that sort of interest you. Are there any games that were particularly influential, either from your upbringing or even from your recent gameplay experiences, but anything that's either emotionally affected you or just driven you in your work?
Okay, so just generally, not particular. Probably the most influential. There's two very influential games for me. One is Final Fantasy VI, and the other is Metal Gear Solid 2.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And so the reason for FF6 being a favorite is I think it was like a first like truly like expansive RPG that I played. And if you play the game, you know that like it has like the largest cast in the series. So like
it gets confusing.
Yeah. Like it set the expectations very, very like in a very particular way. And then they have sequences where the party like is like separated in multiple small groups, and like they're doing their own thing, or like. Spoilers, but I mean, it's been 20 years.
Yeah, it's okay.
But late game, there's a very dramatic shift in the world where like everyone is scattered. You're searching for them. Like that sense of, I guess. So I have a history major. I studied that Soviet history. And the reason why I studied history is because I care about the processes and I care about people's decisions as a result of those processes. And so when I saw a game like Final Fantasy VI and the way it was handling, like the way it was depicting the world, the way it was depicting how characters that were once in your party adapting to the choices, so adapting to their situation, it just broadened my horizons about like okay, games can do that. That's fascinating. So that's one big influence.
Good choice, yeah.
The second, Metal Gear Solid 2, So it was the first game in the series where like they added the trank gun, right?
Yeah.
And I remember at the time thinking, okay, so why don't I just kill the guy? But
What am I using this for? Yeah.
exactly, right? Like
Yeah.
it's making my life harder. Of course, I mean there's like significant benefits here, but I think it opened my eyes towards um, the how often violence is forced in games, and how often the player doesn't really get a choice as far as like why can't I defend this person? Why can't I spare this person?
Right.
And and I guess stealth mechanics also kind of tie into that. So it just opened my eyes towards, okay, so what else can games do? Like what else can be expressed through gameplay mechanics? And yeah, so that always sticks in my mind as like as something that's like over time defined the series in a great way compared to other stealth games. But that like something that I want to like represent in my own project as well. I mean,
Right.
it's funny that I mentioned that because the Shrouded Isle doesn't have like
I was just gonna say, you can't spare anyone, you can't maim them, like offer a limb.
Yeah.
But that's in the DLC or something.
Right. I used to have that option in there, but what I found that during testing was that players were just disappointed by the result. I mean, like, what did you expect to happen? Like, if a person lives and bad, like overall, like I need to like impose some sort of penalty as a result.
I see.
But it's like it just wasn't uninteresting. Like, it was a lot less interesting than like what players imagined that would happen. But maybe on a rebalance patch, like we might look at the story. I don't know. But
that's interesting. Just knowing that it's maybe easier to predict players' fantasies when it comes to killing people rather than sparing people.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
Like, how do you make pacifism like a compelling thing to do?
Right.
Is a big challenge. And like to go back to stealth game, when they're played well, like nothing happens. The main character just like goes through the stage.
Yes.
And from a developer standpoint, I put in so much effort into making that and just walk through it.
It's true. Yeah, I remember seeing someone play Metal Gear Solid for the first time and thinking like, is this fun? I'm not sure. Like, it seems like it's unnecessarily hard, but I think as you say, like figuring out how some of those mechanical and physical elements for the player can manufacture themselves psychologically, and then how you score those as a plus or minus, I'm not sure. But I think the Shrouded Isle is sort of taking steps in that direction. And as you say, if it's something that maybe players don't want, hey, so be it. I know we all like to destroy things in SimCity more than we like building them, right? So it's the God complex, which is kind of a big part of this game. Have anyone? It doesn't have to relate to Shrouded Island anyway, but has anyone sort of acted as maybe a role model or a hero or someone in the games industry that you kind of look up to when you're working on a project? Your co-founders aside, that doesn't count.
Okay. It used to be that I really idolized Hideo Kojima because I was a huge fan of the series. But it's a difficult question over time because like the longer I work in the industry, the more I realize how much work goes into any given thing, and that the people that you see in media, like they're not necessarily like you think of like your favorite experience, right? And you think of a very particular aspect of it, and like someone did that, but it's impossible to know who was who ultimately made that happen.
Right.
In fact, it's probably a group of people that made it possible.
Team behind that person, absolutely.
Right. And so I guess so I think over time I've had like a more like favorite studios or like role model studios than particular developers. I mean, that being said, from everything I read in interviews, like Sid Meier seems like the kind of person I aspire to be. It's like as far as like focus on systems and whatnot.
Yes.
But for like among indie studios, I'm a huge fan of Clay Entertainment's work. So they made Don't Starve, and recently they released Oxygen Not Included. But like my favorite work from them is actually Invisible Ink.
Oh, cool. I haven't played that one, but I've heard quite a bit about it.
Yeah, it's
It gets called
really
out a lot. Yeah.
yeah. It's really remarkable the way they combined this stealth into a turn-based roguelike like mechanics. It was really awesome. And also, Supergiant, they recently released Pyre, and
Yes.
but like the way like the level of quality and polish that they bring every time is just astounding.
Interesting. Now I know, obviously for a studio like Kitfox, you guys had kind of a unique beginning, and I actually work with Lightning Rod Games, who is also part of the Execution Labs
Right. Yeah.
incubator, so I have some insight into it. But for those who don't, it's certainly a unique opportunity for a small studio to sort of in some secure way start to build projects and sort of build from the ground up. Given that there's a lot of different ways to get into the games industry, is there any kind of generic advice that you could offer for someone who probably much like yourself maybe 4 years ago is
Okay.
maybe not with a studio but looking to ambitiously work on their own projects? What sort of just something that you'd wish you'd known yourself, or just something that you think might be valuable to others?
There's a couple things I suggest. If you don't have a clear hard skill, definitely learn one, whether that's through school or through self practice. I mean, myself, I went through Vancouver Film School's game design program, and I focused on coding. But like when I enrolled in the program, I really just wanted to be the ideas person. But of course, everyone wants to be the ideas person.
I hear that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's. I think there's when I was looking for information about how to get into game development, there was some like outdated information, I guess, that was floating around.
Mm-hmm.
And there were suggestions about, hey, make a game design doc. But I think like in our current situation, like because every major engine's free now,
yes.
or at least you can learn for free.
You can get to it for free. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's like, if you are really passionate about it, there's no excuse not to fiddle around with these things. And besides that, though, something that worked particular for me in retrospect is I was in the right place at the right time, twice.
That helps.
So, like at first, I was raised in Vancouver, so it was a hub of the industry.
It's a great industry city, yeah, for sure.
But I mean, at the time, though, most of the opportunity wasn't mobile, but at least the opportunities existed. And then when the studio I was with at the time enrolled into the Execution Lab, I moved to Montreal, which is has like a bigger scene now, and a much better like indie scene. And so I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I chose to just stay in Vancouver instead. Right. But yeah, like I think maybe like a better phrasing than like being at the right place at the right time is a willingness to move, willingness to change context, taking the risk, and it's not going to be financially viable depending on your situation. But I do believe that's better than. I think it's really important to be in a community fundamentally, and like Montreal in particular has a phenomenal like a development community.
Definitely. It's it's a real hotbed, and there's a lot of people who are again sort of smaller studios who have actually enjoyed quite a lot of success. So you can you can see how the people are sort of directly connected to the projects a little bit more easily.
For sure.
I guess just in that your advice is to sort of have that focus. I know that you mentioned that you had a history major initially. Does that mean that you weren't planning to go into games, or was games something that you'd always planned for and it was just one step along the way?
So growing up, I actually had no idea how the development scene was in Vancouver. I guess I was talking to the wrong people, but like for the longest time, I had no idea that I could pursue a career in game development. If I knew sooner, I probably would have prepped a lot more directly towards this career. So at the time, I was planning on pursuing a career in law, and so But like after finishing my bachelor's, though, I found out information about various game dev schools in Vancouver, and I decided to take a chance.
Awesome. And as you say, yeah, just take that chance
Right.
and stay focused, and it'll pay off. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know we were chatting earlier, but just for the benefit of anyone watching, I know you're going to be at a few events coming up in the near future, sort of talking about your experience and your insight. Where can people see you coming up?
So in mid-September, I'll be in Busan for Busan Indie Connect.
Awesome.
So we'll be showing the Shrouded Owl. And then after that, in October, I'll be at the Canadian Game Expo here in Montreal, talking about Kitfox's experiences like indie game development.
Fantastic. Yeah, we will definitely be at CGX, and we'll be following the other kind of vicariously online, I guess. That's how Twitter is, right? But in the meantime, if anyone is watching and they are interested in checking out the Shrouded Isle, you can, of course, head over to the Steam page right now. It's available. Try it out. It's interesting. I think we've done a good job of not giving away any spoilers in this conversation, so I'm going to continue to tread very lightly. But as I said, it is a game where I feel like if you guys wanted to add other endings or do more in the future, it's certainly cool. Otherwise, Jongwoo, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you, sort of telling us about how this game came to be, and I guess how you came to be as a game programmer.
Oh, it was my pleasure to be here.
Kitfox is always very helpful when it comes to lending out their talent to talk to the Game Dev Cafe. In the meantime, my name's Karina. Thank you everyone for tuning into GameDevCafe.com today. If you happen to catch this interview midway or right at the end, we will be putting it up on YouTube, so you'll be able to watch it later. And of course, we'll follow up with an article where you can find all the links to Kitfox games, their other games like Moon Hunters, and of course the Shrouded Isle and all of its information. Thanks for tuning in, and Jongwoo, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.